The regime then in 1990 was morally defeated before elections.
If we miss this opportunity now, how would it be justified? Or would it be ever justified?
And disillusionment drove them to a decision that we should now try something else.
Action is needed not only at home but abroad too.
You can defeat the regime like that on a depression, mode.
Unprecedented verbal attacks on the British ambassador, the German ambassador.
If you have to choose the colonies, better be British.
Absolutely.
But of course, you don't want to be a colony.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia. This is my English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality news and analytical media content, and GISAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the big questions of the Georgian politics, today we're privileged to be with Mr. Giga Bokeria, who is the leader of Federalist Party. He used to be Secretary of the Security Council, Deputy Foreign Minister of Georgia, Member of Parliament. He's one of the founders of Kamara movement. He's one of the founders of Liberty Institute. And it wouldn't be exaggerated if I say that he's one of the masterminds of the Rose Revolution and most importantly post-Rose Revolution policies that were implemented later on by Saakashvili's government. I wouldn't be asking this daft question that is very popular now in Georgian media, which is like why he's not in prison. But what I would say that he's, I would say if there are 5 people who can be held responsible for the successes or failures of the Rose Revolution and the Saakashvili's government, I think Mr. Bokeria is one of them. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here to share my views. I agree with nearly everything you said, describing me. One was I would say an overstatement about being a mastermind of Rose Revolution.
One of the masterminds, I said.
And the Kamara movement was not founded by me or anybody. I was lucky and enough to be close to the group of those youngsters who started it. And then we acted together, the Liberty Institute Kamara, but I can't claim that we founded them. It would be incorrect to say that. Other than that, I think it was more or less a short but proper description of the events that I was part of.
All right. Okay. Before we dive into the Georgian current affairs, and there are a lot of things to discuss, obviously, because who you are, I think our audience would be interested to know, for example, if you can think of a few things that you did together with Saakashvili's government, obviously, when you were in government, that you are proud of and that you think that shaped even today's Georgia, and a few other things that you regret doing or regret not doing. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it won't be the first time during those years that I have tried to respond to those questions. I think, in short, what I'm again feel lucky and feel honored to be part of was the transformation which happened in Georgia together with the Rose Revolution. The Rose Revolution was an important kickstart of that, but it continued afterwards, and it was called by one of the good observers as mental revolution in our society, where I think for the first time in our recent history, since we restored our independent statehood, that the citizens became the owners of the country, or at least made a step towards the direction when citizenship matters and the government is considered rightly so accountable to the public. And I think the resolution itself and the reforms afterwards have shaped the fundament for the modern Georgian state, where, again, the bureaucracy serves the people, where corruption and organized crime is no longer considered as endemic Georgian flavor, which we should just accept, and the nihilism which prevailed in the 90s, that we are doomed to be talented, quote unquote, people, but incapable of governing and incapable of having public services which can provide services to people, so on and so forth.
Yes, this
The
Russian line that you can dance and sing and all that and sport and
precisely.
that Kobakhidze mentioned a few days ago.
Laughing at the idea that Georgian police can be in a shape when they will take bribes, or that when bribes would not be considered as normal, and again when criminal authority and so getting behind this Russian post-Soviet swamp, and again, I can't pretend to be neutral in assessing that period where I was part of that team. But I think walking from the cliff where at the end of Shogun's era we were, with the failed state, infiltrated by an adversary, an enemy, Russia, at the time when Russia would appoint people on critical positions, like our security minister before the revolution, who is now in Moscow, of course, participates in FSB joint evenings openly, so it's not a conspiracy theory or just my personal knowledge or secret knowledge, it's public. And it was public at the time. And again, Russian infiltration, corruption, organized crime, complete dysfunctionality, and lack of the belief that we can build a modern state in our elite, which was following, as you said, the Soviet-Russian metropolitan narrative of talented but incapable society of governing. I think, and I'm lucky, and I feel honored to have been part of that effort, which I think has laid that fundament, and of course, making at the same time, in harmony with that, a clear step towards going back to where we belong in Western civilization. It's not only just NATO or EU, though both, especially NATO, critical for our statehood and sovereignty, but overall making that fundamental shift, which now is under threat. But again, this is, I think, the testament of the magnitude of that step, because even after 11 years of the reactionary rule of Ivanishvili's regime, it's still there, and I believe, I hope, and I believe that it will not be defeated, and we will prevail in that direction despite the current drastic situation. It goes in package with the other. I think the best test for some of the reforms and transformation is that, again, despite the 11 years of reactionary rule, Georgia is still, in certain areas, with public services, or with, like, in a good sense, trivial policing and patrol police, ahead of some of the much more successful countries. Georgian police doesn't take still bribes on the streets. When again, to say that is nothing to be happy about, but it's just remarkable that and our public services are still better than in some well-established liberal democracies and republics. And again, nothing to be happy about because of the fundamental challenge that we are facing. And that brings me to the second part of your question, where I think there was a profound failure. I think the profound failure, which was mostly the responsibility of us and our political elite, which was ruling at the time, and not the geopolitical circumstances, because those also were a factor. But again, well, things can be in your favor or against you. It doesn't. It contributes to the picture. It's worth mentioning to analyze. But when I'm talking about our choices, I think the biggest failure was not making steps to have checks and balances. In particular, the tradition of lack thereof, of tradition of independence of judiciary, and overall not deconcentrating power, whether within the central government or vis-à-vis the decentralization effort and local self-government, and primarily the independence of judiciary. And I consider my personal failure something that I always believed in as a crucial reform, and again, not only now, but then too, publicly, an introduction of the jury trial on criminal cases as a fundamental factor towards the concentration of power.
Okay, you spoke at length about Rose Revolution and its legacy. Rose Revolution, of course, it was some purely Georgian thing, but it was also part of the wave of revolutions that also it was generated by and it also generated. So I know that you studied the Serbian example quite closely, right? And yes, I mean the first Velvet Revolution happened in Serbia, and
I'll inject a little bit.
Yeah.
I prefer to see it as part of the continuation of previous revolutions, like the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia at the time, and the transformation of Poland. Well, it was still a revolution based on Solidarność movement. So I see that as a bigger package of enlargement of the free world.
I understand, but I think that the Polish revolution was coming
in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, that was kind of long ago. So what I'm talking about more of the 2000s, when then you had it in Serbia, then you had it in Georgia, then you had it in Ukraine as an Orange Revolution.
Yes.
Then it had some continuation in West Asia, but I don't really count it as a revolution. But what I want to ask you is this. Again, when you look at these three countries now, again, probably Serbia needs another revolution. Georgia is even in worse situation now. We are on the brink of dictatorship. Ukraine is in war with Russia. Do you think that this is happening because of the external factor? Because Russia played hard in Serbia, in Georgia, in Ukraine, etc., or it is because of the post-revolution governments did something wrong or didn't do something right? I think. Do you see this?
I think it's both.
These dots. Do you can you connect that, or they are not connectable? Yeah.
Well, I think they are connectable because, as you said rightly so, the Russian factor is there, not in identical
no, of
shape.
course not. Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about Serbia because of geography, but I think it's legitimate to connect those dots. And to come back to your question, is it Russia or is it
both,
the failures? I think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of others, but
Sure.
In our case, it's both, as I described in the previous question. And one can certainly say that post-Orange Revolution Ukraine's reforms were not successful. But again, I would be cautious in claiming that if they will be successful, we would be now safe. That is incorrect. I think Russia have used both the failures of any political lead in areas where they wanted to destroy the statehood, and I think in case of Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, it's quite clear that the fundamental position of Russian political class since the fall of the evil empire, Soviet Russia, even before Putin and of course after Putin, was not allowing successful statehood at any cost, including direct military aggression in Georgia in the beginning of the 90s, long before there was any EU or NATO enlargement issue at table in our region. I'm underlying that to demonstrate again for anybody who would listen that that is the point, that for Russian elite have never accepted a failure in a Cold War, and they wanted to rebuild. At every moment their ambition was to rebuild the Russian Empire. They were just weak until a certain moment, but wherever they could, they used not only infiltration, destabilization, but also direct military aggression to achieve their strategic goals or tactical goals at the moment. So Georgia in the beginning of the 90s, in 2008, Ukraine now, full-scale, huge European-scale war aggression with brutal methods both in Georgia and in Ukraine. So I think Russian factor is there for sure. and well, where Russian goes helped by failures of the political class in our case, yes, I think they use that. Will it have been avoided, the Russian aggression, if it would be tangibly more successful? Still probably not, but of course you would be in a stronger position. I think the biggest failure in our case, and I'm no expert about the internal Serbian things, so I'm aware of the events since removal of Milosevic there. But in case of Ukraine and Georgia, I think safely say that our failure not to be in shape as a state and as political elite at the end of 90s, throughout the 90s, in the end of 90s in particular, during the default and after default in Russia, where Russia probably was at the weakest, and when Baltic states who did make reforms, again, not ideal, many shortcomings probably there, but fundamentally managed to transform itself into a functional liberal democratic republics, and worked hard to lobby their positions in Washington, in all European capitals, from moral and pragmatic point of view, but were in shape at the right moment of the history to make steps which protected their republics and their democracy, and become members of NATO and then and the EU. When we and Ukraine, because of the failures of our political class at the time, in case of Ukraine, Kuchma, and in our case, the latest periods of Shevardnadze's dysfunctional, corrupt, infiltrated rule, we were not in shape. So we missed the moment when you make. So in that sense, you can say that there were states. Now, if we're talking about Rose Revolution, I think the situation was more difficult. The trajectory was that when we were getting in shape as a country, Putin was consolidating power, and the unipolar moment was fading away, step by step. So I think those things were not in our favor. There's nothing we could have done about that. But I think if we would have been tangibly more successful in transforming our institutions, I think it would have been much harder for a reactionary force like Ivanishvili to implement state capture, which we are now facing.
Absolutely, and what you said, and I want to continue on that, because you said that, well, when talking about late 90s, you said that, the Georgia lost its momentum, but the Baltic states used it because they were in shape.
Georgia and Ukraine too.
And Ukraine too. And I think that history repeats itself in a way that, that time in the late 90s, early 2000s, European Union, NATO, they were on the expansion mood. They were kind of ready to accommodate some of those former Soviet, former socialist countries, basically. And that was two factors altogether. It was the countries themselves, that they were putting themselves in shape and getting ready for this big transformation, and also NATO and European Union and democratic world that was also kind of ready to accommodate them. I think we are also getting closer to this kind of situation in 2030 when another big bang expansion of the European Union is expected, and the momentum that we are also missing now, I would say almost equivalent to this late 90s momentum that we missed. And again, so that was justified somehow because Georgia was in civil war and busy with something else, and etc., etc. If we miss this opportunity now, how would it be justified, or would it be ever justified? Because we could be in shape, and we are in shape. If not for the Ivanishvili's regime, I think that we are there.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, if not in this case, is not something which can somehow calm us down. The government that we have, we are all responsible now.
Yeah.
Some of us more than others. Those who are in politics more responsible for not being able to deliver a different situation in Georgia. But again, as long as we have this disgraceful Russian-driven by substance, Russian-driven regime we are responsible for that. So we will deserve it when we achieve that goal of removing this government and having a government which will have our national interests at heart. Now, you said that it's I would just add one caveat, that the security aspect is and power aspect is very important. So NATO issue, which is now not discussed.
And just one more thing. So I mean, you said
So-
that, well, in that time Russia was its weakest point.
Yeah.
Now Russia is its weakest point too, if you ask me.
Well, yeah. I think still that period was much more less risky in that sense.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that. But yes, certainly, I believe that Russia will get weakened, and it will be a tragic failure of us as a nation if we won't be in shape again. Just I hope, and that's my belief, and that's what we all strive for, that until this new window of opportunity will be closed, we will be in shape, unlike the 90s. Now, but again, I don't want to paint that picture in such a rosy thing. I mean, unlike that moment, which was still during this unipolar moment of US security and military dominance and Western world dominance, now it's an active and a very dangerous confrontation between Russia and its totalitarian allies and the free world. So the EU enlargement vision, which is back and which is good, it's not sufficient. What's needed is a power counter weight to the Russian and its totalitarian allies' expansionism. Now, we see that there are moves in that direction, late, but still better late than even later in that sense. And yes, our goal as a nation is, at this historic moment full with huge danger, unlike end of 90s, immediate huge danger, but also hopefully the huge opportunity, just like end of 90s, to break through this post-Soviet Russian swamp which destroys the idea of our republic and liberty. And yes, that's why it's our national goal now to get in shape as quickly as we can. And then, despite all the risks, and to be more precise, because of the risks,
Absolutely.
be hyper active in making steps to secure our statehood and sovereignty and liberty within the country.
Okay, so you said that, well, we need to get in shape as soon as possible, and without pushing Ivanishvili out of power, what is not possible, I would say. And how are we going to do this? And this is the big question. And this is what the parties and activists and the active people in this country are all about. But to describe the situation, now we are in a situation that I don't really remember since the conception of Georgian state, if you ask me, because overwhelming majority of the opposition leaders or political leaders are in prison. We have draconian laws that we've probably never had in Georgia. Not only political leaders, but also some of the CSO leaders are also they could easily end up in prison because of this FARA law,
and
which
we
is
have over 50 citizens of Georgia,
Yeah,
which are
absolutely.
not political leaders, but responsible citizens who are political prisoners in jail with
absolutely
heavy charges.
Absolutely, and Ivanishvili's regime is clearly they have line. They are moving forward with that line. Well, understandably, they backed themselves in the corner. I understand that. They also passed the return point, and there is only one way to go from them, just more repression and the taking a tougher stance on the resistance. But what the opposition, what the active people, protesters, what they should... What should be the policy or strategy to counter the existing regime? And we saw a few days ago when 8 political parties, including your own party, stick together, agreed on boycotting the elections and to start a new wave of resistance based on non-recognition, non-compliance, non-cooperation. I understand that. I see the logic there, and I also understand that, and I'm sure you agree with me, that whatever I named, whatever I said, again, non-recognition, non-compliance, non-cooperation, maybe that's the right way forward, but I don't think that's enough to grab power from Ivanishvili's Russian regime. And also, you don't really have this complete unity there too, because we see the Lelo hesitating, Gaharia's party is out of question because they already declared that they are going to be part of the local elections. Well, still, I mean, also it would be interesting, your opinion, why these people do this, because I mean, for me, it is, to be honest, I don't really understand what else could happen. I mean, all red lines are already crossed by the Ivanishvili's regime. If somebody is waiting that now, tomorrow, they will do something worse and then we'll get united and we'll stick together, I mean, yeah, they've done already more than enough. And there is quite a lot of reasons for all the political parties to realize that there will be no political future for any standalone party, okay, if this regime kind of stays in power. And I also don't understand this idea that, okay, some parties say that, well, 8 political parties, they didn't clear the threshold, some of them did, some of them didn't. Well, if you ask me, in democratic world, in the parliamentary system, okay, when people gives you mandate, like 2 parties, 3 parties, 5 parties to form a coalition, that comes with time frame, normally. So you are given the mandate from the public, then you have certain time to put the coalition together and form the majority and run the country, okay? This mandate was given to these 4 groups. Yes, I gave my mandate to one of them, hoping that these guys would cling together, command majority, and run the country. I understand that, well, the power was usurped, elections were rigged, but still my expectation was that these guys would cling together inside or outside parliament. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? But now it's not only 6 months, it's already over 6 months since the elections. So the mandate that they got expired. So they need to get new mandate, I think. And in that, I mean, understanding, what I don't really understand is that why these people are still complaining about or still referring to the election results. And coming back to the questions that I have, again, the first and key question is that I'm sure you understand that this is not enough, what these 8 parties are doing together, and what else is needed to make resistance stronger and make it reality and make strong discomfort for Ivanishvili's regime. And second, okay, what is the logical explanation for Gaharia's party, whose leader is in exile, and Lelo party, whose leaders are in prison, still kind of sticking with this line that we are going to take part in local elections? I'm sure they realize that, I mean, 4 groups together were not able to win. Well, they might have won the parliamentary elections, but they were not able to sustain this victory. And when 2, the weakest link out of these 4 groups, are now going to take part in local elections, how are they going to win it? And if they are not going to win it, then why are they doing it? I mean, does it participation matters, or maybe they want to be part of the systemic kind of the opposition? I mean, they want to become systemic opposition to the Georgian Dream Party. That I don't know. I mean, I went too long. I mean, I promise I'll stop my rant here. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, to start with the biggest issue, of course, which was at the beginning of your long question, was so what we can do and what we should do to get out of this deep trouble with the Ivanishvili's regime and its open drive towards giving up our sovereignty and our legitimate ambition to be an independent state and to accept the servitude of Russian state in this region, because basically that's at stake. So liberty inside countries, so state capture, power in one hand, comes in package with the drive to accept the role of the subservient, like not identical with many differences, but Belarusian, current Belarus situation. Yeah, again, with all respect to the fight of the Belarus people against the dictatorship, that's the situation there for years, and I'm highlighting that because if we go back to the chronology of the events, the elections which were held were not free and fair. It was heavily influenced by vote buying and suppression of the vote and violence and other significant manipulations. So it didn't result in free expression of Georgia public's will. But the protest after that was complete failure, which was driven by political parties. I think the protest erupted, and despite that now we have a more passive phase, still is very strong and continues after Ivanishvili's puppet Prime Minister Kobakidze made that infamous statement when he said we are putting on hold the Western integration, and the message was rightly so clearly understood by Georgian public that it was a message after elections, we now have power, now you should accept that we are choosing this post-Russian, Soviet Russian swamp as our only way of continuing. So just accept that we should no longer have an ambition to be a sovereign and free state. That was the essence of the statement, and that's why the protest erupted after that. And that also reminds me and reminds us the huge problem that political parties, all of us, in different shape, with different anatomy, with different weight of mistakes inside, do not have a genuine grassroots support and have fundamentally erased the trust of opposition voters in institutional political parties. And that is a huge problem. And it cannot be solved at one moment. And that is, at the same time, a huge weakness of this protest, but in certain cases a strength too, because there's no head. This protest, which still goes on and will continue, is spontaneous, and it has no head. Yeah, it has it is a problem sometimes, but overall it's also a problem for the government, because all these events of the repressions and arrests, including opposition party leaders, but most even prior to that, those active citizens now it's up to 60, I think, with the recent events who are facing, could not break the will of the society to continue to protesting. And that brings me to the oversimplified, but still the response to your first question. The only way, which has no alternative, is to continue protest in the streets, to continue routine and targeted protest by all groups, and to continue communicating with the citizens of this country, which are unhappy with this regime, but have not joined protest yet, to make this protest to bring this protest to a scale and depth and intensity which cannot be handled by a repressive regime. And we do have an example, which we haven't mentioned before in this conversation, of Armenia. A very recent one where we had a government which had everything under control and was quite decisive, to say in a diplomatic manner, ways to govern. Yeah? And there were protests, huge protests, which were unsuccessful. But then at a certain moment during the recent years there, but then at a certain moment, the resistance and rejection of the status quo became so universal. And again, there was no, the single leader emerged during the protest. At the beginning, there was none such a single. It was driven by the fundamental rejection of the government, of that government, by absolute majority of the public. And though the repressions initially were attempted by the government, it became soon clear that they cannot handle them. But they arrested hundreds of people there, and it fell apart. And again, there are no identical situations, and again, I'm not claiming that.
It was kind of different, but yes.
If there is an example for us to look at how these kind of regimes are are defeated, it's that we need to, and that's where the political parties' role also comes into play again, to involve more part of the public which are unhappy with the situation but don't want to take a risk in removal of the change in the status quo because they have fears what change will bring, despite them fundamentally not liking what this government is doing. And that is a challenge for all of us, first of all political parties, but also all the active citizens which are part of this protest. Now, we do have an example, again, by far not identical, but still relevant, of how the Russian communist regime was defeated. Yeah, they were in charge, and there was a resistance, and there were victims of that fight, and then there were elections, but the regime then in 1990 was morally defeated before elections. The will of the regime was broken by Georgian public before the elections, and then elections were still important. We still all celebrated the victory of the of the national forces against the Russian communists, which were represented by ethnic Georgians, but it was the Russian communists who were defeated at the time. Now again, the geopolitical situation then was that the Soviet Union was crumbling, and I understand that difference. We are not there yet. Russia is not yet crumbling, so to make a parallel with that. At the same time, I think there were places in Russia, Soviet-occupied countries then when communists were not defeated. So what I'm saying is that it's still a relevant example for us.
Okay.
What happened then, and the Armenian example, very recent one, more than an example of Rose Revolution by far, because the Rose Revolution was a dysfunctional regime which was defeated on an election day, and then they tried to rewrite the results which and even with the rewritten results, they were not clear winners for. I mean, it was huge advantage which we failed to achieve on election day. Now, again, these elections were not legitimate, not fair, free and fair, but it was not sufficient victory to break the will. This protest is a protest which started after that, and it is huge. We saw huge numbers, and we still see tens of thousands of people routinely protesting, and on targeted days even more people coming out. It's not sufficient. You said it. I mean, it's obvious. If it would be sufficient, we would see a change. But it is a huge problem for this regime, and all these repressions, these shameful steps of direct violence and arrests, and now a legislative assault on freedom of speech, uncompared to any period of our history, is caused by that. Yes, they are strong enough, he is strong enough, Ivanishvili, to hold power now, but internally they are under huge stress because of the moral isolation inside the country and internal isolation. Both of these things are putting them under pressure. So again, without too much over optimism, I must say it's a very difficult situation. Probably we'll have months ahead with much more dire situation, but we have no alternative than to first continue protesting every day on Rustaveli, in other cities, everywhere, and have targeted actions. And the political parties, and it brings me to the second part of your question, have a responsibility to step by step rebuild the trust of the opposition voters first, but in general our citizens towards them by showing them consistency in the course, and being a leading voice in demonstrating to them that there is a viable alternative after the removal of regime. So it's double thing. It comes in package. Demonstrating to those citizens which are unconvinced yet that the change is absolutely needed for their own safety, for their own security, for their own well-being, and in package with that, demonstrating that the change will bring the responsible political forces who know what to do after this huge damage that Ivanishvili's regime has already caused to us. Now, it's easy to say, hard to do, but again, there's no other alternative. Step by step, everybody, including political parties or smaller civic groups, we should try in enlarging our circle. Because without that, this kind of authoritarian regime cannot be defeated. And that brings me to the tactical strategic issues of local election, next election. Now, I want to say my party, Federalist, and I have never been eager to remove the elections as an instrument, despite all the violations and huge manipulation, because it's always a preferred way of defeating the regimes, kind of regime that we have, with overwhelming majority. That's why I bring the example of 1990, that it was communist. Yeah? But there are concrete circumstances where local elections, like the one that we are now facing, because of all of those events that you described, but even without arrest of the political leaders, our position was that in the current situation, when we have not broken the will of the regime yet, it can be and it will be used to drive the demoralization of the public. That's another attempt. And again, it's not illegitimate, and that's why I reject the charge against the parties which decided to participate at this stage, at least, for saying that they want to be systemic opposition. I mean, this is one of the things I reject in political discussion, which is GD-driven, to just throw this kind of accusation at parties, even when you fundamentally disagree, as we do disagree with them. That's not the same. That's not what I'm saying. I think whatever is the motivation of the leaders of the level who are now in jail and who are political prisoners, and I wish them liberty and support as personalities, but their fundamental mistake is that they didn't see, as I understand, they didn't see massive demonstrations as we saw in December and January, and got disillusioned. And disillusionment drove them to a decision that we should now try something else. And that's never a good guide. Now, if you are, I mean, you cannot defeat the regime like that on a depression, in a depression mode. And again, it's weakness. And so, in a sense, it's more than a crime. It's a mistake, to paraphrase a famous French diplomat, what they're doing. Because your desperation cannot be your guide. Now, it's easy to be optimistic or enthusiastic when you are clearly winning, and I believe and I trust that we will win this fight. But this is a difficult moment, but we need a consistency and strength at this moment to rebuild the trust of the voters, which are standing on the streets, and then to build the trust of the citizens which are still hesitating whether they should support or change. And this cannot be achieved by being, to paraphrase the Bible, neither cold nor warm, like all the time. And that's why I think it's a fundamental mistake by those parties to out of their weakness to conclude that you must do something because there's nothing we can do with the protest. That's how they feel. That's what they actually virtually said publicly. And that's why it's a paradox that you say, we're going to win, but then they say, we are so weak, and that's why we participate. I mean, the question that they have posed to us in a public manner was, so what do you do the day after elections, like 6th of October? And of course, it's a self-defeating question. What do they do? And what if there would be no local elections now? Should we have now put it like ceased existence? You should then they would say, yes, we should continue protesting. That's why I believe, again, if they had an argument in participation or joint participation, which is a legitimate view to discuss, it should have been pursued fundamentally in a different way, not in a way of confrontation as they chose to. We Federalists never attacked them. Initially we said it's not the right thing to now become an issue of separation when the government propaganda pushed this issue in January. As you remember, it was driven by them, not us. But then time came, and it would be wise to have a consultation within the political groups and with active civil groups before Lelo and prior to Saakashvili launched the campaign without any consultations. And they say, now let's talk when you alert up. This is, I mean, there is no second chance of the first impression. This is a British saying, and that damage is already done. And so I think now the only way is for them to look at the situation, to look at the polling numbers, that the protest vote is fundamentally against that, and it's impossible to convince a tangible part of those voters, even from their position. And so they are leading this way to contribute to the government's propaganda of demoralization. That you said one thing, then they did another, and you failed again. Instead of continuing a targeted moral hit on them through demonstrations, despite arrests, despite repression, and because of that, to demonstrate that these repressions are not achieving the goal that the regime wants, that the protest cannot be stopped by that. Now, again, it's easy to say, for me, as you noted out, I'm not in jail and somebody is in jail, but I think regardless of that, the responsibility of all active citizens and especially political leaders is that it's not about the personal fate at the moment. Political repressions are a horrible thing, and political prosecution is a destruction on the way to build a normal society. But what is at stake now is even bigger than the problem of political prosecution, is the very idea of us having a self-governing republic and sovereign state. And that's where we have a huge majority of Georgians sharing the view that the course of giving up sovereignty is not acceptable. So we should focus on that.
Okay, you said that, okay, the talking is easier and we talk a lot, but action is needed and it's much harder. And I absolutely agree with you that, well, the politics and politicians are about actions. I mean, analysts could talk, basically, or analyze, but the politicians should act, and this action is missing, and we will see that. By the way, action is needed not only at home, but abroad too, because that's the other side of it. So I understand and I agree with you that, okay, we need to bring the protest to a scale when Ivanishvili's regime is not able to handle it any longer, but doing it inside the country without the pressure from the outside would be difficult. And also what I hear from our friends in Western countries, in the democratic world, that they also have this feeling that we talk a lot, but the action is needed, we all understand that, but there is no action. And also what we see happening with the ambassadors of the Western countries, unprecedented verbal attacks on the British ambassador, the German ambassador, and the EU ambassador. First, my question is that why is it happening? I mean, they can't really damage the countries, obviously. I mean, calling a British ambassador the example of colonial thinking, or this is yesterday Zarko mentioned that this is the British colonial policy and thinking that they are trying to do. And well, sadly, Georgia has never been a colony of the United Kingdom, so if it were, things could have been different, but that's absolutely different,
be careful,
different
not
issue.
to be misquoted by Garan propaganda. Being a colony is never good, but as a famous, Jewish conservative leader and pro-independence and leader Jabotinsky said, well, if you have to choose the colonies, better be British.
Absolutely.
But of course, you don't want to be a colony. You want to be an independent sovereign state, which is at stake now. So why are they doing that? That's the
continue.
question.
One question is that why are they doing that? Second question that I want you to answer is this: what else our democratic friends can do better outside of the country? And the last one is that when we don't see action, and there are many reasons for that. Is this because they fail to bring this action, or we fail to show how important or how dire or how problematic situation is in Georgia? Because there are lots of talks about that. For example, European Union cannot agree on sanctions, etc., but they can agree on sanctions on Russia whenever they need, because it's been already 17th wave of sanctions they produced against Russia. Why? Because, well, of course, I mean, Orban is there and Fico is there, but still the pressure is enough to engage them and agree on sanctions on Russia. That shows that either we are not lobbying Georgian issue correctly, or we are not making it as important as it should be. I mean, again, what else can be done outside of the country? And again, why this attack on ambassadors is going on? Because even Russia, or even in Belarus or Russia, I don't see this kind of attacks on the ambassadors.
Yeah, first, the style of Ivanishvili and GD was there from the very beginning. Many people don't remember that the Swedish and Lithuanian foreign ministers were called as agents of opposition and enemies of Georgia in 2013 and 14. Yeah,
Oh, I
Karl
don't
Bildt
remember
and
that,
Linkevičius.
Okay, yeah.
And we had this line by GD at every stage when they were criticized that this is not the Europe we want. His famous letter to the European parliamentarians. So this, both authoritarian and in substance, the Russian nativist playing game was there from the very beginning. It just have been gradually moving to a direction of overwhelming message. And of course, I think the Russian full-scale and open aggression, it was always a full-scale in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, but like declared official aggression against Ukraine was a point when the Western position changed to the more adequate one. And it put Ivanishvili's propaganda at the choice. Now, before that, they were doing this, but they were also still pro-European. They were comforting some European views, quite mainstream ones, that they are ready to accommodate Russia, are not a headache for our Western friends vis-a-vis Russia, which is what they saw as a way out, fundamentally wrong attitude towards accommodating the Putin. But GD was in harmony that wherever they had some criticisms, they were very aggressive. But then, when at the huge price paid by Ukrainian people now, but the Western community, including the political class of most of the EU countries and big players, shifted to more adequate view and confronted Russia, that's where the GD propaganda went to a several degree more aggressive tone, though still trying to have, when they can, ambiguity and something, but clearly to an unprecedented and savage rhetoric and actions against our Western partners. I think it's a natural part of their line towards the Georgian voters that whenever they are criticized, or even when they are not criticized or accommodated, as we have seen now, they need to show that there is a threat coming from the Western society, because without that, what is the justification of his rule? His rule, what he's trying to sell to voters is that we are sacrificed just like Ukrainians by West for their own big game against Russia, and your children will die because of those big games, and I'm here to resist that. It's all enormous and this not only dishonest, and my English is not enough, like treacherous lie, of course. But without that, there is no message. His message is that if I'm removed, there'll be chaos and violence because Russia will attack you and West will use you for their own games. And also the subplot is the identity message that West is decadent and will force our kids to become gay. So they will use, by the way, this is very typical now, that they will use both the rhetoric which labels the Western civilization as decadent, woke craziness, which again, they use the real examples of a debate in the West to transport it to here, completely misrepresent it. But the real problem, which is there here, but also they will use like leftist line that West is colonial imperial power. So they'll use both, as Russian propaganda does. So in this case, they are the same as Putin propaganda. So I don't think there's any puzzle there why they're doing it. That's the only message that they can have. What else can they tell the citizens which are deeply troubled by current situation? That there is a crisis for everybody, including people, as we saw in the recent research, who still unfortunately support status quo or are GD supporters. They are nervous and troubled by the situation. And that's why he needs to double down on that line, which is of course is a disaster for Georgia. Our biggest threat is being isolated from the West, alone vis-a-vis Russian threat. But again, it brings me to your previous big question. Our big question is, what do? We need to continue in hitting this regime in every communication with every citizen, that this guy and people around them are the source of the destabilization and chaos, not the vice versa. Now, but to your question about our Western partners, I was always very critical of Georgian politicians publicly putting so much emphasis on what our Western, this must be done, or this will be done, or raising this expectation, not because it's not a legitimate goal, it is. And all of our communication of my political group or people around us or parties which were part of the presidential platform was indeed to communicate to our partners why it's not only morally correct, but in the interest of the free world and EU and NATO and Euro-Atlantic security to be clearer in their messaging at a certain stage against Ivanishvili's regime, and now to have tough measures against not only top brass, but all the vertical of the power structure that is participating in the repressions. That's what I believe is what is needed from our partners, and that's no secret. We're openly lobbying for that. A vertical, not only top, not only mid-level, but even low level, and especially low level, en masse repressive regime representatives being targeted, because that's something which will contribute to diminishing of the risks of the further violence and chaos. No guarantee. I'm unable to have any, let's say so, detailed analysis what drives the reasons of mistakes which I believe were done by our Western partners in dealing with this regime. And I don't believe it brings us anywhere, because I mean, we have examples when regimes like Mr. Ivanishvili or even worse were not sanctioned at all. There are many factors which contribute to tactical or strategic decisions or mistakes done by our partners. What is our goal is to have the protest here ongoing, because that's the major factor. That's what is decisive also for our Western partners to react to. Because if there's no protest, I don't think there is a chance of more consistent policy from our friends. Now, you gave an example of comparing Russian sanctions so that the detractors within the EU were convinced in that case. Well, yeah, but there's still, not still, but difference. Russia is committing genocide and war crimes in Ukraine. So, I mean, but as a principle, I understand what you say, that if there will be enough political capital used, even with the institutional shortcomings which are there, not shortcomings like default shortcomings, it would have been possible to have a more consistent policy. Yes, I believe probably it's possible. It's our goal to push for that in the future, whether it's EU or UK or US, everywhere. I'm just not putting as a citizen, or a politician, my hopes on that. Yeah? I think that pressure, which we'll see from them, the isolation, some sanctions, again, more are needed for sure, are playing its role. What is needed is here firmness, first and foremost, of political parties, and then the whole active part of the protest society in the situations when the protest is not huge for the moment, but those who are at the core are still consistent and pushing and convincing others who were on the streets a few months ago now are not, that they will and should come back, and that they should convince others to join in. Now, foreign pressure will help in that sense, but will not be decisive. Decisive is the climate here. And again, I'm using too much of the examples of the successful removal of the Soviet regime, but we had phases in end of 80s of the protest being huge, like the first protest my father took me to in November 88, which was a huge thing. I've never seen so many people against the Soviet occupiers at the same place. It was huge, but then there was a period of relative passiveness, and then came the wave. So I believe the wave is there. We just need to be in shape to be ready for the next wave of the public protest to deliver the result of this regime accepting, and this guy accepting that he cannot rule anymore, and then we'll have elections where the government will have no chance in using the methods that they used in previous elections, and then we will have a difficult but necessary and doable task of removing the damage done by Ivanishvili's regime and implementing the reforms which are needed for our sovereignty, security, and liberty inside the country.
Thank you, Mr. Bokeria. Of course, there are lots of other things that we could discuss, but the time is against us, and I need to bring it to a close.
I already spent too much time, so those who will listen.
If you would like to add something, please feel free. Otherwise,
thank you for the opportunity. And I think when you're saying that to do something, I mean, this podcast and all new wave of using social media to discuss issues, in Georgian primarily, of course, are something that we must pursue to enlarge and to involve a lot of people and to have debate on many issues. And again, the fundamental thing which I reject is that because we face existential threat, which is the case, that there should be less debate between political or civic leaders on various issues. On the contrary, we need more debate and more even harsh things, but demonstrating that there is a viable core of political and civic class to other citizens, which will lead the country after we defeat this regime.
Thank you once again, and thank you for watching us and listening to us. Please like us, subscribe to us, and I'll see you next week.